question of God has occupied the human mind since the beginning of time. Have you ever asked yourself, why is there something and not nothing? Why is there anything at all? Doesn't there need to be some ultimate explanation for the reality that we see around us? Throughout history, the great majority of people in all times, places, and cultures have come to the conclusion that the best explanation for us and the complex and beautiful world that we see around us is that it was made by a creator. Over the years, there have been many diverse arguments put forward for the existence of God. Today, I want to briefly explore 3 classical arguments for God's existence. The first one is the cosmological argument, or the first cause argument. This argument is kind of interesting because we automatically kind of know these things even before someone else lays it out for us. In its simplest form, this argument states the following. First, anything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Second, the universe began to exist. Third, therefore the universe must have a cause that is beyond itself. This argument is based on the idea that if something begins to exist, it has to have a reason for beginning to exist. It has to have a reason for coming into existence. In other words, something does not come from nothing. Why doesn't this apply to God? Because God never began to exist. He is by definition eternal and uncreated. So you see, there are only 3 possibilities here. Either everything we see came from nothing, everything we see has always existed, or everything we see was caused by something eternal, something that has always existed. The first option is logically impossible. Something cannot come from nothing. And there are several really good reasons for us to believe that the universe began to exist at a fixed point in the past. Suffice it to say that there are significant philosophical problems with a universe that has always been. And the scientific evidence that we have points quite strongly to the fact that at one point in the past, all these things that we know now, things like matter, energy, space, and even time itself, came into existence. So there must be something eternal, something that has always existed, that caused all that we see around us. And when you come to this point, you have to ask yourself the question, what kind of cause could have created the universe that we see all around us? When you look at the size of the universe, with more than its 100 billion galaxies, a breadth that it would take a laser beam 93 billion years to cross, it is clear that whatever the cause of the universe, it has to have great, even infinite power. I mean, how much power does it take for something, even something small, to come into existence, for something to begin to exist? When you think about the complexity of the human mind, when you think about the human brain, the DNA, the dragonflies, the rainforests, dolphins, and on, it seems clear that whatever the cause of the universe, it has to have super intelligence. When you think about the moral law written in the human heart and our own consciousness, you get the idea that whatever the cause of the universe, it cares about good and evil. So when you put these ideas together, things like eternal, great power, incredible intelligence, goodness, you suddenly have a cause that sounds a lot like a traditional definition of God. The second argument that I want to explore today is the teleological argument, or the argument from design. This argument is pretty straightforward. In the universe, we observe order and complexity that cannot be explained by chance or some unguided processes working over time. Instead, these things can be best explained by an intelligent cause. To illustrate, if you were walking along the beach one day and you saw a rock, you might say to yourself, that rock may have always just been there. But if you were walking on the beach and saw an iPad, something in you knows that that hasn't always been there. Something in you knows that a mind, much like yours, created it. Or suppose you're walking among the mountains and you see these interesting swirling patterns. You might think, there have been years of wind and rain that caused those beautiful swirling patterns. But if you're walking among the mountains and see the faces of 4 former United States presidents staring at you from the mountainside, Mount Rushmore, something in you knows that those were produced by intelligence. Or suppose you are lying out in the park and you look up in the sky and read, "Drink Coke." Will you think, wow, that's an unusual cloud formation? No, that is a message. And messages only come from minds. And get this, the DNA, in its simplest life form we know, has enough messages, has enough information in code to fill 1,000 sets of encyclopedias. In the same way, when we look at the laws of chemistry and physics, the inner workings of the cell, our own mind, and a trillion other things, we find that only an intelligent cause could produce those kinds of things. One of the most exciting discoveries of recent science is something called the fine-tuning of the universe. Scientists have found that many things in the universe, things like the mass of the electron, the strength of the force of gravity, the nuclear force that holds the atoms together, the speed of the expansion of the universe, and so on. These things has to be exactly what they are for any possibility of life. Some of them are so exact that if you change them just a little, like 1 part in trillions, it would not be possible to have anything like life. But how can this be explained if everything is a product of chance? Well, here's the hint. It can't. The final argument I want to consider is the moral argument. The idea here is this. If there is no God, then there really is no basis for real good and evil. In other words, if we are just a collection of atoms and product of chance, then good and evil is just an illusion. The problem is, even though some people can say, all right, it's just an illusion, something that is just in our heads, people cannot and will not really live like this. As soon as they feel that some injustice is being done to them, they will shout, "No fair, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that," and speak as if morality is not just something that we made up. This is a powerful argument. If you want to really be able to say that loving your neighbor is better than eating your neighbor, or that it is really wrong to torture a little child for fun, then you have to base it on something other than the material world. From matter, you can get data, but from matter, you cannot get morality. The famous Russian author Dostoevsky said, "If God does not exist, everything is permissible." In other words, everything is allowed. He was right. If you give up God, you have to say that many things that are at the very center of human experience, things like meaning, purpose, beauty, freedom, goodness, love, etc., are just illusion, with no reality behind them. But there are very good reasons for us to trust what our hearts and what our minds tell us. And they tell us that these things are real. And if they are real, there is a real God that stands behind them. Throughout the years, many people have argued that a very credible case can be made for the existence of God. Historically, many different arguments have been laid forth for the existence of God, and today we looked at three of them: the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. Perhaps, like countless others, you are able to see today that the case for a creator is truly compelling.